Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is Do You Need That Game? This is a series I have on the channel where I take a look at all the games I've reviewed since, well, usually since the last video, and I talk about those, more with a bit of a critical sense of, even if I like them, where do they fall, are they essential, what other genres or games might be worth exploring, or if you already have, you may not need them. At the end of the day, ratings and rankings are one thing, but sometimes there are good games, there are better games, there are comparable games, there are other games you can always look at. And one thing I'm doing differently this time, I'm trying something out, is I'm going to be going through these. There's, I think, 30 games that I'm going through today. 30 reviews I've done in the past roughly 6-7 weeks since the last video in the series. And I'm going to be going through these in order of what I liked the least to the most, okay, in rough order. Now, when I say rough order, it means I just threw these all into PubMeeple. It's the same ranking engine I just used for my top 100, go through a bunch of questions, and spit out the results. In this case, I did not bother reordering them or looking at them or trying to overrule it. I just went with the rough general order. I'm not looking for an exact order. Yes, it's entirely possible that something I ranked 3.5 will be higher on the list or lower on the list than something I ranked a 4. This was basically me just going through and saying, what do I think I'd rather play right now? So again, I didn't reorder, I didn't do whatever. It's just a general order of stuff. But with that said, let's go ahead and go into these 30 games in rough order from least to most interested, starting off with Bristol 1350. Bristol 1350 is a bit of a hidden role game with a plague theme. To me, it didn't really work in terms of the general mechanic. I think that the role of hidden movement, it does well, that's fine, but then the aspect of the game itself didn't really have a lot of strategy, in my opinion. I don't know who it necessarily is for, because I don't think it's a great hidden role game. I think there are better hidden role games that offer you just more of a fun experience with more strategy and possibly more chaos at the same time. If you want the chaos, if you just want the randomness, it's hard for me to say, because I don't know well the market of what other games would be comparable if you're focusing more on the fun aspect as opposed to the strategy aspect. Not that strategy isn't fun, but I think Bristol 1350 suffered from a bit too much randomness for it to be a game that I can really recommend. I think people might enjoy it, but I just don't think I can recommend it as far as being best in class in any way. Next up from there, we have Cuphead. Cuphead, the fast-rolling dice game. This is an interesting one, because I actually, despite the fact that it didn't work for me, I can very much see it working for other people. I think Cuphead is a good game to jump into. I think it's a good game, despite the fact that it's the second lowest on this list. To me, that's more slight nitpicks around the mechanics, around the way the game played out. It's a fast-rolling dice game, and the dice rolling sessions of the game are 10 to 20 seconds long. So you basically have a half hour of gameplay and about 4 minutes of actually playing the game. The rest is set up, tear down, and prep for the next thing. That part didn't work for me. That said, the sense of escalation as you unlock more stuff, as you go through the various bosses, as you get more gear, as you upgrade your characters, as you actually go through the experience, I think it was semi-reminiscent of the video game itself. I think Cuphead is a good game to pursue if you like the IP, if you like the video game and you want a board game around it. If you don't, then if you don't care about the IP, I think it's still a fine game. I just don't think it necessarily stands out. The problem is real-time games are not that frequent. There are a bunch of them, and the ones that are good are just, there's not a lot. There's Escape, there's Kitchen Rush, there's Rush MD, there's Project Elite. There's not a ton of real-time games out there, so it's hard for me to really compare to exactly what Cuphead matches up to. I think it almost stands on its own in the way it's trying to handle things, in the way it handles those phases. So while it is lower for me, it actually is fairly different, and if you like the video game, I definitely think it's worth looking at. If you don't like the video game, I have a harder time saying where it lies. Number 28, we have Ruination. Ruination from Travis Chance from Colossal Games. This is one that didn't work for me, but I know it worked for a bunch of other people, which makes it hard for me to peg where it lies. For me, it didn't work because in the genre of area control games, I have a lot of other area control games that I'd rather sit down and play. Ruination is fast-paced, it is punchy, it is the action, the turns are quick because of the fact that you have basically, you draw a card, you do what the card says, move on to the next person, unless that triggers a combat, in which case things do slow down a bit, which is one of the potential complaints I had around it. I had a few small nitpicks as to why it didn't work for me, but I also didn't have as firm of an idea as why it didn't work for me compared to some other games. So it's harder for me to peg exactly where this lies. I think it's worth taking a look at, specifically because of the genre, the general ratings of the game already, and other reviewers who have really enjoyed it. So I think it's worth taking a look at, even if you like area control games, I think it's worth examining. If you like games like Kemet or Blood Rage, I think that's the genre it's going to fall in. For me, Kemet and Blood Rage were personally preferred games, which is why it's lower on my list. From there we have Waste Knights. Waste Knights is a solid game from I forget the name of the company. I'm blanking. Galactus Game Design, I think it is. But Waste Knights is a story adventure game, which you're basically going through a bit of a narrative aspect to choose your own adventure. It's sort of campaign driven, not really, because each scenario stands on its own, but there is a sense of sort of a interweaving stories as you go through the progression of the game. But again, it's not really campaign in a typical sense, just multiple scenarios you can play through. The game was good, but also leaned more towards, I think, a higher degree of randomness and a higher degree of pushing towards the story to the cost of the mechanics itself. Now, I know they actually came out with an app, or they're coming with an app, to make the story, to make it quicker as you jump through various aspects of the story, to hopefully improve that immersion in the experience. I think Waste Knights is a game worth looking at if you prefer story over mechanics and you want that aspect. It did a lot of things really well. For me, the story at the cost of mechanics, not the cost, that's a little bit too harsh. To me, the game seemed to lean more heavily onto the story elements, and the mechanics seemed to be a little bit on the lighter side, which is something that has worked for me in other games. One of the games I compared it to in my review was Destinies. Destinies is more of a competitive game. Waste Knights can be more cooperative at times. So it's not a direct comparison, but for me, I preferred Destinies, which is why Waste Knights is lower down on my list. Next up, we have Harakiri Blades of Honor. That's a Kickstarter that I reviewed. Give me 1 second while I drink some coffee. Harakiri Blades of Honor didn't work for me for 2 reasons. It's lower on the list. It's a game that I enjoyed my time with it, but it basically had 2 phases to the game. It had a adventure phase and exploration phase. I always mix up the 2 terms. I think the adventure phase is the main part of the map. I have always mixed up those terms in the game, but there's 2 phases. There's a general map exploration where you go through a bit of story and interactions, and you do have some things like combat, but it's more abstracted, and then it goes into a full dungeon crawler mode. I did not like the adventure phase of Harakiri. The dungeon crawler mode, on the other hand, I did like, but it actually felt very reminiscent of Wild Ascent to me, and I really like Wild Ascent, and so I didn't need a game that half matches up with Wild Ascent and the other half I don't enjoy. So for Harakiri, it was a game that fell into this weird spot because of that division of the 2 genres of the game. I enjoyed it. I mean, the fact that I'm comparing the exploration phase to Wild Ascent is a good thing. I really, really enjoy Wild Ascent. It's one of my favorite games in that genre. But again, it overlapped with one of my favorite games in one area while being not the game I'm looking for in terms of the exploration phase. Going back to Destinies or Waste Knights, if I want that kind of experience, I'll go to Destinies or Waste Knights. I don't need the adventure phase of Harakiri Blades of Honor. Next up, we have Steamwatchers. Steamwatchers is another tough one for me because of where it lies. Steamwatchers is a game that I enjoyed my plays of Steamwatchers, while yet again being another area control game that doesn't work for me quite as much because of the other area controls I love, the other area control games I love. I like area control as a core mechanism in which you build the rest of the game around it, and Steamwatchers seem to lean more heavily into the direct area control, less in the way of powers and abilities, less in the way of phenomenally interesting elements that make the whole puzzle work well, less in the way of any form of catch mechanics. It's a punishing game if you get hit at all and if other players choose to double down on you. Because of the fact that you get more orders, more actions, the more spaces you have, as soon as you get hit once, you start losing space, and it's one of those games, cascading, it's called cascading failure, I think it's called, where basically the idea that as things get harder for you, it inherently becomes even harder the next time. It's not just one failure pushes and leads towards the next. Thematically, that's absolutely accurate. That's how life works. In real life, if your bases are being crushed, you will have a harder time doing well. In terms of playing a game, which I do for fun, I don't love the mechanic of cascading failure. So Steamwatchers have that aspect, as well as a lack of general powers and abilities. I think people are looking for a cutthroat, hard-pushing area control game where area control is the core mechanic, then I think it works. I think it's a really good system. I've enjoyed my plays of it. For me, it didn't work because I like the other things around area control. I like the other things that give me more to push for, more to fight for. It reminded me a bit of Nexus Ops and what it's doing. A little bit different, but it did remind me a bit of Nexus Ops, which is another area control game that I never really kept in my collection. Next up, we have Ancient Blood, The Order of the Vampire Hunters. Ancient Blood, Order of the Vampire Hunters is one that I am still mixed on that one. To be clear, this is a tricky one because this is one of those things where the way I rate a game is based on my experience of the game, but the way this list is ranked, the way in terms of least to most, is often biased not just by what I think the game is on its own, but biased by other things I have that are comparable. So, for example, Ancient Blood is a good example of a game that I actually really enjoyed and rates higher. My rating for it was higher than a bunch of other games low on this list. But because of what it's comparing against, because of other games that I'm looking at when I think of what I want to play, in terms of absolute ranking of preference, it's lower. Hopefully that makes sense. I probably, annoy a lot of you with that, but that's just, it is what it is. If I'm looking at a game like Cthulhu Wars, which left my collection, it's gonna be, even though it's a 4, even though it's a great game, it's 4 to 5, but there are games that are 3s that will rank higher on the list because of the fact that they're more likely to get played. So, Ancient Blood. Ancient Blood is hard for me to perfectly quantify because of the fact that I didn't have a full playable copy. I had a bunch of semi-disjointed experiences under the guise of, hey, here's a sample of what the game is. And it works. It gave me a feeling for what the game is, but it didn't give me a cohesive singular experience, so that does bias my opinion of the game. Now that said, I did like it. I really enjoyed diving into Ancient Blood. I really enjoyed the mechanics of the fighting, the growth of your characters, the way you have a lot of strategy as you go into this like vampire pit or whatever and try to kill everything. I really enjoyed many aspects of the game. I didn't enjoy direct head-to-head combat quite as much as taking out mobs with a lot more strategy. Direct head-to-head combat felt more like roll dice, roll dice, roll dice. Overall, I liked Ancient Blood. It is going to be a hard one for me down the road to figure out where it lies in my collection. Do I want it, do I not? Because I'm comparing it against other games that do dungeon crawling, and I like dungeon crawling as a general mechanic. I mean, it's basically dungeon crawling, that's all it is. But I like the Zombicide series, I like Massive Darkness, I like Cthulhu Let Me Die, I'm sorry for just saying 3 Command games, I like Machina Arcana, there's a bunch of other non-Command dungeon crawlers I enjoy, and so Ancient Blood is fighting in a category that is very competitive for me. I very much enjoyed Ancient Blood. I don't know whether it will or won't stand out because of the other strong games I have. As a general rule of thumb, if you are doing something well and I have other games that do that thing just as well or more, these ones will win. You have to come in with something shiny and interesting enough that really compels me, really pushes me over the edge for me to say, I'm going to give you time compared to one of my favorites. It does mean that despite the fact that I might come across as Cult of the Nuala, at the end of the day, I will prefer older games that have worked for me over the new shiny when they are comparable. I prefer the new shiny when it does something amazingly innovative or fun, or just really stands out as a well-designed game. And trust me, we'll get to some of those as we move up this list. Then from there we had Warpgate. Warpgate is a game from Wolf Designer. That one is over here. Warpgate is a fast-moving 4X game. It's a 4X experience in which you are basically trying to play it in roughly an hour, maybe 90 minutes depending on the player count, and it does deliver on that promise. It's fast-paced, you're playing cards into an action row, one at a time. I think I had one person who thought I was programming it out. You're not programming it out, you're playing cards into action row one at a time, trying to determine the action you're taking and the multiplier, the strength of that action as you take it. It works really well as far as what it's doing. To me, the most comparable thing is Last Light, which is coming out from Roy Kennedy from Grey Fox Games soon. That's the biggest one this is going to be comparing against. Last Light in general, is a game that, as well as I do like Last Light, I'm very interested in Last Light, but like Warpgate, both of them are 4X games, and 4X is a genre I always want to like more than I actually do like. So they're both always fighting an uphill battle, because I love the concept of the genre. In practice and execution, they haven't really worked well for me. And well doesn't mean they're not good, well means that they're good, but I'd rather play games that are great. Warpgate is still in my collection for right now because I'm curious what the expansion brings to it. I know there's an expansion coming, and it should, in theory, remedy some of the complaints I had against it, or improve upon some of the complaints I had against it. Overall, Warpgate is good. It's a question of what you're looking for in terms of fast-paced 4X games. Exodus, Proximus Centauri, and Last Light are going to be the closest things, and even Exodus is a longer game, so there's not a ton of direct comparisons if you're looking for fast-paced, punchy 4X experiences. Next up, we have Khora. Khora, Rise of an Empire, I think that's what it's called, from Yellow Games. Khora is a game that I didn't keep because of Terraforming Mars, practically speaking, or even Ares Expedition, because it can't compare directly Khora to Terraforming Mars. The game lengths are not comparable at all. But Khora is an empire-building game, which you're trying to play cards and actions and combine them in ways that really give you a fun little tableau of building up your stuff. Everything else you do is very abstracted, from the your civilization, from your armies, from everything you do is just pure abstraction of the genre. But it works well as far as giving you a very strong tableau building experience. For me, I'd rather play Ares Expedition. Ares Expedition will give you that same gameplay in roughly an hour. Very different games, but the sense of escalation, the sense of tableau building is stronger and greater in Ares Expedition. I also prefer Terraforming Mars, but that is a much longer game, so harder to compare. Khora comes in at roughly an hour, which is a solid game for the game time, and the cards give you a lot of puzzles as far as different ways of building out your engine, and I really enjoy that aspect of the game. But while I really did enjoy Khora, it's one that I'm comparing against. Again, I'm comparing it against other tableau building games in my collection that do it better better. Next up, we have Brian Boru. Brian Boru, which is not on this table over here. Brian Boru is it's a trick-taking, drafting, area control game from Osprey Games, from the designer of The King is Dead. I haven't played The King is Dead, I need to do that, but basically, Brian Boru is a solid game that I really enjoyed, and it's very different. It stands out in a crowd. If you're looking for other different games, I mean, there's not a lot that does trick-taking, area control, and trick-taking and drafting and area control. Those things are very interesting when paired together. I think it worked fairly well. For me, the area control is a little bit more abstracted, and the puzzle of trick-taking and drafting actually really worked for me in Brian Boru, but the area control aspect just didn't feel as strongly area control, so much as just placing things down. It felt a little too abstracted, not as richly rewarding. I enjoyed Brian Boru, but it's very unique. It's very different. I don't have any direct comparisons to say, hey, if you have that, then you'll like Brian Boru, or vice versa. And I don't really like trick-taking in general, and Brian Boru is one of the exceptions where I like the trick-taking in Brian Boru. The rest of the game around it was good, but not great, but the trick-taking actually did stand out for me when combined with the drafting and the mechanics at play, and the fact that when you lose a trick, you're still getting something. So sometimes you even intentionally want to lose a trick, which adds to the element of how do you want to play a trick? To win, to lose, both will give you something. What do you want to do, and how will other players get in your way? Brian Boru worked really well, very different, very unique, but not one I'm keeping ultimately. Next up, we have Seven Wonders Architects. Seven Wonders Architects over here. I think it's a great gateway game. If you're looking for a good gateway experience, if your primary focus is, I want a light, simple game, I think Seven Wonders Architects is clean. It's very clean. It does a good job at what it's doing. For me, though, it's just not a game that I feel the need to play. It's a game I'm happy to play. It is possibly, and I have to look at my collection, but this is going to be in the tier of games that are as light as you can imagine, while still being enjoyable for me to dive into. Seven Wonders Architects will fit that bill. It is very, very light in my opinion, and yet it's a game I still enjoy playing. But it's light enough that I'm not going to request to play this one, and it's basically an abstraction of Seven Wonders. In case you didn't know, I just dove into this one. It's an abstraction of Seven Wonders. It takes the core mechanics or elements of Seven Wonders, distills it down to an even simpler game than Seven Wonders already is, and says, here you go, here's a new game. It's enjoyable. It's just not overly compelling because of how light it is. I don't have direct comparisons for this one. It's a light game. That's the genre I'm comparing it to. Very, very light experiences. Next up, we have The Adventures of Robin Hood. The Adventures of Robin Hood is a storytelling game from Cosmos, leaning into you playing as the characters Robin Hood, Maid Marian, and Little John, and I always forget the last one. Whoever it is, the last character. I'm blanking on his name. But either way, you're playing as these characters as you go through the game, as you go through the story building experience. The Adventure of Robin Hood is very unique in the way it handles the sense of exploration of the game. You have a game board that you're going to be flipping tiles as you go. You're going to be flipping different tiles, and the board remembers certain states. Certain tiles flip back, certain tiles don't flip back. They have a whole mechanic of how that works, and it gives you a sense of exploration and journey. We also have a fail forward mechanic in a way that I don't know if I've seen done before, in the sense that it's not just fail forward. When you fail, you actually effectively unlock a recovery scenario of, oh no, we failed our thing, now here's a story of how we can recover from what we just failed. So in a weird way, you actually get to experience more of the game, more new parts of the game, if you fail your adventures. When you fail a second time, then you just effectively are replaying the scenario, but the first failure every single time opens up new narrative aspects to the game, unlocking more things going on. Which both those aspects, the game board in general, and that aspect of fail forward, made it very much stand out to me. Like I said before with some other games here, it's a lighter experience. You have to be in for a lighter experience, but it's one that I've enjoyed my playthrough, and am not fully done it yet, but I'm basically almost done playing with my daughter, and we're going through the whole thing, because it's accessible, it's easy, it is enjoyable, and we get that sense of unlocking and exploration that the game is giving us. Then we have Wild Space. Wild Space from Pandasaurus Games is a combo-tastic card game. You're basically playing cards with the mindset of trying to get as many crew as possible onto your board, but more specifically, the right crew is better than more crew. The right crew will score you points in different ways. You want to focus on different species. You want to focus on all the species, because I'll give you a bonus point there. You want to focus on the way those abilities combine and give you different things. It's fast-paced. It's combo-tastic. Combo-tastic, I think, is their word, but it is combo-tastic. You'll have turns where you play 5 or 6 cards in a turn, and it feels so rewarding when you do so. Ultimately, past that initial high of the game, this is one of those games that has a low honeymoon phase. In other words, games can be compelling in different ways, but sometimes you get past the honeymoon phase of a game, and you're like, oh, turns out that game was really compelling for the first month that I had it. The second month that I had it wasn't as compelling. That's what Wild Space is to me. It's a game that's really compelling for the first month that I have it. Sorry. It's a game that's really compelling for the first month that I have it. It's not a game that compelled me past that first, the first few plays. It was enjoyable, it was great, but it also was short-lived. So that's Wild Space. Then we have 17, Paper Dungeons. Paper Dungeons, sorry if I say the numbers are just, there's 30 down to 0, 30 down to 1. Paper Dungeons. Paper Dungeons is a roll and write experience from Alley Cat Games. I think Alley Cat picked up the distribution. I don't know who originally did it, but Basically, Paper Dungeons is you are controlling characters who are wandering through a dungeon as you go through this roll and write experience. It has combos, it has unlocks, it has abilities and things that are slowly developing as you go through the dungeon. My biggest complaint about it was the sense of exploration of the dungeon felt a little too linear for me. It didn't feel like you had a lot of choice as far as how things develop there, so it felt like you're just kind of doing the same thing. They have a mechanic where you draw certain lines to change the dungeon every game. Didn't feel like it changed things enough game to game for me. I enjoyed Paper Dungeons. It's hard for me to know whether it stacks up. This is one of those games where I wonder where it lies as time goes on, because of the fact that I have a lot of roll and write games, and I like a lot of roll and write games, and Paper Dungeons right now falls in the category of I kind of need an expansion for it to maintain its, like Wild Space before it. The first several plays were compelling, and then it started to get a little samey after that, which led to some of the shine, the luster, walking away. So I like it, I enjoy it, it is a good roll and write experience, but I kind of want an expansion for it to be one that stays for me. Next up, we have Moonrakers. We have Moonrakers, which is not on the table over here, Moonrakers from IV Games. Speaking of games that need an expansion, like we have a few. We have Warpgate, we have Paper Dungeons, and we have Moonrakers. Not games that necessarily need an expansion, but for me personally, they are games that I'm waiting on the expansion to either fix or add content or something to them. In the case of Moonrakers, I like the game a lot, but my biggest problem with it, and it's a very unique game, it's deck building negotiation as you try to go through missions in space, teaming up with your enemies, allies, however you want to define them, because they're basically trying to win against them. But it's a game that the core gameplay felt most reminiscent of Cosmic Encounter, that sense that you're trying to win on your own, but you need to ally and team up with others on the way to actually get there. Although in Cosmic Encounter you can win with other people, in Moonrakers you can't, at least to the best of my knowledge you can't. But maybe you can. I'm wondering if you actually can. Can you share? I don't know if you can actually win with others. I have to double check the rules on that. Either way, Moonrakers is a game that has, like I said already, negotiation and deck building in space as you go on missions. The core gameplay generally works. I have found, though, that some of these games, including Cosmic Encounter, including Moonrakers, fall victim to the idea that players don't always play the way the game wants you to play. And so I find these games are very group dependent, which means, typically speaking, they don't last in my collection because I don't like games that are situationally good. I like games that are always good. And Moonrakers and Cosmic Encounter are both games that I have had fantastic experiences sometimes, and then completely mediocre experiences other times, and that just really hurts a game for me. Now, Moonrakers I know is coming out with an expansion that theoretically addresses and further incentivizes the right type of collaboration in the game. I'm curious how that does for me in terms of picking it up. If it gives me consistently good experiences, then yes, I'll keep Moonrakers. If it doesn't really change things, then no, Moonrakers will go away. But Moonrakers and Cosmic Encounter are going to be the biggest comparison I'd give as far as other comparable feeling experiences. Mechanically, they're very different, to be very clear. Mechanically, the two games are very different, but they give me the same feeling personally. Next up, we have Tiny Towns. Tiny Towns is a lighter experience. Tiny Towns over here somewhere. It's another lighter experience that, like games like Seven Wonders, not Architects, regular Seven Wonders, Tiny Towns, there's two more. There's Ethnos, and then there's Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig. Those are all games that I find they're not as rewarding as I would like from a gameplay experience in terms of the strategy, depth, fun, whatever elements you want to combine together. But I find all of them are strongly accessible to a wide variety of player accounts and are easy to teach, easy to dive into. They all hit a certain space in my collection. But those, by the way, those four would be the comparisons I have. If you like Seven Wonders, I think Tiny Towns is fitting to that same genre of feeling. Not mechanically, but the same way it can be accommodating to a large amount of players, be rewarding on the one hand, and light on the other hand. I think all four of those games fall into the same bucket. For me, I like all of them, I enjoy all of them, I'm happy to play all of them. I don't often request them, but when I have the right group of people, whether it's a bunch of new people, whether it's a large group of people, or sometimes it's a medium-large group of people with different skill levels of gaming, I find all those games work well for that. In Tiny Towns, by the way, it's bingo. You're basically playing out, you're calling out a color of material that then goes towards building a building, and once you establish a pattern on your board, you build a building. The buildings each have different point scoring mechanisms, and so you're trying to figure out the way to slowly build out your buildings while taking into account your own bingo as well as your opponent's bingos, basically the materials they call out, so you can properly accommodate and be flexible in your building plans. Next up, we have Merchants of the Dark Road. This video is going on much longer than I intended, so I might have to pick up the pace. Merchants of the Dark Road from Elf Creek Games. Really, really solid game. It's a heavy Euro game. They're a dime a dozen as far as heavy Euro experiences that give you something to go on. Now, where Merchants of the Dark Road will stand out is in its production value. Meaning, if you like Merchants of the Dark Road, I think this is one of the prettiest games you will like. For me, I enjoyed Merchants of the Dark Road, but like other games on this list, I kind of need an expansion for it to stay relevant for me. Some aspects of the game I really enjoyed, but the core gameplay loop felt very similar game to game because of the fact that you have to balance your prestige and your income, and there's really only two primary pathways as far as how you get those. Combine that with some luck, some other elements of the game that I didn't love, and overall, I liked Merchants of the Dark Road. I've enjoyed my plays of it, and I'm happy to play it if people ask, but Merchants of the Dark Road is one that I'm not heavily rushing to play again. I liked it, but I kind of, again, similar to other games, I'm kind of like, I need an expansion, then I'll talk about it, but I don't know. In the case of Merchants of the Dark Road, I don't know if an expansion is coming. I believe Paper Dungeons, I heard an expansion is coming. I know Warpgate and Moonrakers are getting an expansion. I believe Merchants of the Dark Road has an expansion is coming. If I recall correctly, the reason the board is a puzzle, basically, is because of the fact that the reason the game board is a puzzle is because of the fact that it's meant to be modular, where you plug and play different expansions, which could mix up the variability of the experience. I'm very intrigued by that, but I don't know if an expansion is coming, or if that's my own memory just like defaulting, or even my own suspicions. I can't remember if I just thought that, or someone told me. I don't remember. But Merchants of the Dark Road is one that I enjoy. I like it. It's a solid Euro game. Works really well. For me, it's just the gameplay was a little bit too samey as far as the general experience of what's happening every time I play the game. Again, different notes as far as how you get there, but generally samey in feeling. Then we have Rolling Realms. Rolling Realms is another roll-and-write game. Very, very, very liked. I think I like this more than people will like this one. I find Rolling Realms very compelling in the different scenarios it gives you, as well as the very strong solo play. It gives you like 18 games to go through. Very strong. I've already played Rolling Realms like 20 plus times. Well, I've done the full 18 plus more. I probably had like 25 plays of Rolling Realms. Really, really enjoyable game, but it's also very, very light. Again, I like it more than I think people will like it. It is simple, it's compelling. You're basically combining 3 different realms from Stonemaier Games designs. I think they're adding other designs, like they have Terra Mystica, they'll be adding more, but you basically mix them up and they all give you different tweaks or variances to the general core gameplay. It's a light experience, but it does work well for me. It's something about it is compelling. Maybe just the variability of the fact that every game is a slightly different puzzle. I like variability in games, and it definitely gives you that. The core gameplay is light, but the variability is enough to keep me intrigued as I play through it. Next up, we have For Glory Champions. This is more of an expansion to For Glory. No major changes here. For Glory is a game that I really enjoy the deck building experience. Champions is good. I like Champions. It adds more stuff. Nothing crazy. Nothing particularly amazing or crazy. It adds some new mechanics. It is good in terms of if you're looking for solo play, or you're looking to play the game with 4 players or 3 or 4 players, then it gives you that. So it does mix up that experience in that sense. But for me, I still think I'm primarily going to play it at 2 players, which means the main thing I'm interested in is the actual Champions expansion, which are these gladiators that you can level up and build. Overall, I don't have direct comparisons. This is a deck building experience. It's head-to-head deck building, so you want to compare it to a game like Star Realms, you can do so, but it does so with a very, very different feel. For Glory doesn't feel directly comparable to other games I've played because of the way it has a sense of escalation in the arenas you're going through, but it works really well. It works really well for me. That's For Glory. Then we have Maquis. Maquis from Sideroom Games. Maquis is a solo worker placement game. Very unique in what it's doing, at least for myself. I don't know a lot of solo worker placement games, or at least none are coming to mind. Maquis is basically a solo puzzle. That's what it is. It's a puzzle of trying to figure out how to place your workers within the engine and the confines of the game mechanics in order to survive. And it is hard to survive. You have to go through it diligently. You have to understand the sequence of how things come out and how the guards are going to get in your way. But it provides a fun, compelling little puzzle. If you're looking for solo puzzles, this one stands out to me as being different and unique, while still being accessible and easy to dive into. But it very much is just, it could be repetitive in the gameplay itself. So as you go through it, understand that the core gameplay is place a person and then see where the next person comes out as you randomly. It's a little bit of luck, a little bit of predicting how things play out, a little bit of trying to be flexible in the way you place things, of choosing when to give up a reward in order to lock in safety and security. A lot of interesting decisions to be made in Maquis. Then we have On Tour from Board Game Tables. This is another roll-and-write game similar to Rolling Realms. This is a lighter experience that I happen to enjoy playing. It doesn't have the same technical variability as Rolling Realms, because you have 2 maps. You have the USA map and the Europe map, and you're trying to basically build a network of paths as every turn you roll dice and decide where to place those numbers, because you have to build an escalating sequence of basically from as low as 1 up to, like, I don't even know what it goes up to, 99. I think it goes up to 99. Very solid game, very accessible, very easy to dive into. The core gameplay is just fun to build up the paths. It's light, but it's enjoyable light. That's On Tour. Then we have Tranquility. It falls in the same exact category. Tranquility is another one that I reviewed this past month, and it is another one that's very, very light, but accessible light. You're basically, again, building out a network of cards. They're actually very similar. You're building a network of cards in Tranquility, going from 1 up to 80, so not from 1 to 99. You have to do it in a pathway, extending pathway. Tranquility is cooperative, though, and it's very, very pretty. I like Tranquility more than I like on Tour. Tranquility is a lot of fun to dive into, plus they have modular expansions that keep it variable. The direct comparison I'll have to Tranquility is a game called The Game. The Game is the one that feels the most similar to Tranquility, as well as on Tour, I guess. Both those feel very similar in what they're doing, while being very different in execution. Tranquility is my favorite of the three, but I have all three of those games. Then we have Land vs. Sea. Land vs. Sea from Good Games Publishing. Land vs. Sea is a 2 or 3 or 4. I think it's a 4-player as well, although for me 2 and 3 stood out. 2 and 3 stood out as being the ideal experiences. 4 is basically just 2-player with teams, which didn't work as well for me. But basically 2 and 3 players. I don't know if there's a solo mode. I think there's a solo mode. I have not played it solo, but it is basically a game of trying to create sections of land and sea in such a way that you basically take over your opponent. You're trying to create enclosures. So if you're playing a sea, you want to create enclosures of sea. If you're creating land, you want to create enclosures of land. As you do so, you'll be scoring points for the size of those enclosures. So it's basically a Carcassonne style game where the entire point is the building of your areas. The entire landscape is what you're going for. It's just a question of which one you're going for, depending on whether you're land versus sea. The 3-player game is very interesting in the way it introduces kind of an AI who benefits from different things happening along the way. So these other small little details, as the AI is playing the game, they're incentivized to close things off, to earn extra points, to find the extra pathways towards points in the game. And it's very, very easy to get lost in the fact that you're playing a head-to-head game with a third player at the table who will win on the fact that you're competing with land and sea. So it works really well as far as the 2 and 3-player games. Like I said already, the 4-player game's a little different. To me, this is going to be most similar to games like Carcassonne. If you like the Carcassonne style of building out a terrain, building out a landscape, Land vs. Sea will have that, while being a very cutthroat head-to-head game. Now, to be fair, Carcassonne's also cutthroat in its own way. Land vs. Sea is almost simpler and more direct in the pure cutthroatness of it. Really enjoyed this one. Solid game from Good Games Publishing. Then we have Bonfire. Bonfire from Pegasus Spiel. This one has an expansion coming that I will be getting. Not that it needs it, though. I just want the expansion for it. But Bonfire is another Stefan Feld game. I like Stefan Feld games in general, and Bonfire is no exception. It is, I would say it's higher up in the Stefan Feld games I like, while still being not as high as my highest Stefan Feld games. Bonfire is, I always have a hard time explaining this one. The general idea is you're building these tribal bonfires, basically, and all these bonfires have different objectives in terms of how you build them. So you might have to do X, Y, and Z, and then you can build the bonfire. And once you build the bonfire, there's all these other elements of the game that tie into the bonfires, how you can earn points around them. So it's central to the bonfires, but other aspects going on at the same time. Like any Stefan Feld game, it is very much a point salad experience, giving you a lot of things to focus on, a lot of things to do. The end game ramps up a little differently than Stefan Feld. It's not like one of those games where you're like, this happens, then you all have one more turn. It's like, this happens, then you have 5 more turns, which is already interesting unto itself, although the turns are fast-paced enough that what you get done in 5 turns is not necessarily as much as you might think, but the game end triggers a little early, but then you have 5 turns. It kind of works, it does what it does, but it's very much point salad-y. Everything gives you points, trying to pursue the pathways. The multiple bonfires all group together in ways that reward your pathways forward, whether you're getting cards that will earn you more abilities or more sense of tableau building, whether you're building bonfires, getting points for the types of bonfires you have, whether different types of tasks you have. Your central tableau as far as how you earn actions is a fun little puzzle in and of itself. Works really well as far as the gameplay. For me, I mean, you can compare it to any other Stefan Feld game. I rank Bruges, Castle Burgundy, any other Stefan Feld games I rank higher than this. I feel like there's one more that's higher. But I do have Stefan Feld games that I rank higher than Bonfire, so it's not like the be-all and best-all for me, but I really do enjoy it. If you like Stefan Feld games, I think you'll like Bonfire, and if you don't like Stefan Feld games, I don't think this will change your mind. And if you're new to Stefan Feld, then get Castle Burgundy first. From there we have Resurgence. Resurgence from Stan Kudowski. This is one that is the only game I really can compare it to strongly is Rurik from also Stan Kudowski. Both of them are fantastic games, very different in mechanics, very similar in feeling, something I said a few times in this video. The idea that a game can have a similar feeling as to the mental gears it's turning as you play, while being very different mechanically. And so Resurgence has that aspect. It's basically worker placement. It's hidden worker placement with unique special roles. That's what it is. It's not really area control. There's no area control going on. It's a map, but it's a worker placement map. And you're trying to accomplish missions in the game. That's what you're trying to do. You're ultimately trying to accomplish missions that will get you points. It's all survival based. To accomplish a mission, you might need food and like ammo and this and that and go to a certain location. But then you have to get those food and ammo and go to that location. So you're trying to effectively keep escalating towards the next mission so you can earn points, while doing other side things that will earn you points as well, such as increasing the general base safety of your own survival. It's like post-apocalyptic wastelands, so you're trying to increase your base, you're trying to improve your base, all those things will give you points as well, but missions will be the primary chunk of points, I think, in the game. And so you're trying to do all that while being mindful of the general puzzle at play, and then you have to do the worker placement. You have to basically allocate your workers at the beginning of the game in a hidden mechanism where you don't know what other players are doing or where they're going, and that is brutal as you try to think and outthink the players and think through the fact that they're going to go where you want to go, and you have to be flexible and accommodating to what they do because it's going to hurt you. Really turns those gears a lot in your mind. It is a very thinky game. If you're AP prone, analysis paralysis prone, this is not a game for you or your group. If you like Rurik, I think you'll like Resurgence. If you don't like Rurik, but you generally like bag building or work, it has bag building. Like, it has bag building, it has unique workers, it has a hidden worker placement, has a lot of things going on together. It's a really solid game for Stan Konowski. Then we have Ankh, Gods of Egypt. Ankh, Gods of Egypt from Command. That is another one I reviewed this past month. Really, really enjoyed that one. It is still below Blood Rage for me. For me, it's Blood Rage, Ankh, and then Rising Sun a few notches down. But I really like Ankh, although to me it actually feels very similar to Tigris and Euphrates. If you've played Tigris and Euphrates, I think you'll like Ankh. It has a very similar feeling in terms of the way it handles a direct conflict game that really is area control, but with area control with math and numbers, so you try to figure out who would win in a situation based on how you place different things. So it very much feels like almost like a combination of Blood Rage and Tigris and Euphrates had a child. That child would be Ankh. That's the way I would frame that one. I really enjoy it. Really solid game. I have not dived into the expansions just yet, but that's where Ankh is. Then we have Radlands. Radlands from Roxley Games. This is a good example, by the way, of how Ankh is lower than Radlands here. I know that Radlands is... Ankh I gave a 4.5, Radlands I gave a 4, but I ranked them slightly different here because Radlands is so accessible to jump into and play that in terms of just ranking of what I'm more likely to pull out and play right now, Radlands would win at the moment. Radlands is really, really easy to jump into and play. It's a two-player game that has it's a closed system, so supposedly it will never be expanded upon. You have a bunch of bases, each player, 2 players, so each player selects 3 bases. You're given 6, you pick 3, then you set it up, and then you're playing with a central deck of cards as you go through it, and the deck of cards is for both players. As you play your cards, you try to figure out which cards you're going to play, which cards you're going to basically junk in order to get their one-time effect, which is not as good, but you can do it more often because you're not limited by the supply of water, which is your currency of the game. Radlands is direct, it's head-to-head, it's fast, it is variable, it is a lot of strategy to it, a deceptive amount of strategy to the game. If you are an MTG player, you will find that Radlands is very enjoyable because of the mindset of it's not always about just play the things that work for you now. It's just as often about holding back for the right turn, for the right sequence of combinations of movements that will give you a stronger punch than just doing them as they come into your hand. Very, very strategic game. Comparison-wise, I think MTG is the biggest comparison I have. It gives you that distilled feeling of MTG in a single deck of cards. Works really, really well. Surprised me extensively. Then we have City of Spies, Estoril 1942, Estoril 1942. I'm probably saying that wrong. I think I've said it wrong multiple times now. But City of Spies from Meebo Games. It is fantastic and unique at the same time. It's a game that is basically worker placement with spies, but you're trying to do so in order to earn more spies. The closest game it feels similar to me is a game called... oh, it's going to bother me. It's a game. I know the game. I'm trying to look at it on my shelf because I don't remember the name right now. Oh, this is going to bother me. There's a game that took place of... the Game of Thrones, the board game, 2nd edition. I always say that you should play... oh my gosh, this is gonna... I'm trying to look at it on the shelf. I can't even see it from here. Okay. This is going to really, really bother me. City of Spies, Estoril is a worker placement game with a bunch of spies you're trying to place out to earn the spies as you go through the game. It basically, it's any game that gives you some sort of hidden placement, I think it is comparable to. Whether that's Game of Thrones with the orders you're placing, whether that's Steamwatchers with the orders you're placing, or whether that's the game that name escapes me, where you place orders down on the board. Same idea as Game of Thrones, just abstracted to its own little game. But it very much is a solid experience that really rewards the tenseness of trying to think through how to mess with other players and how the other players are going to mess with you. It gives you that aspect of trying to figure out what do you have to do to actually survive, to win, to thrive in the game. And so it works really, really well. It gives you the experience in roughly 45 to 60 minutes too, which is very, very nice as far as the amount of strategy and punchiness and thinkiness compared to the game time. Very solid there. Overall, it's a really good game that the closest direct comparison is a game whose name I sadly can't remember. It's in my review. If you watch my review, at the end of my review, I say what it's compared to. Then from there we have Hadrian's Wall. Hadrian's Wall is my number 2 game in terms of the second highest game from the reviews I've done this past month. Hadrian's Wall really stands out for me as being the best, I want to say the best roll and write I've played. I think it is the best roll and write I've played. It's such a meaty experience. It is definitely, well, it's a flip and write technically. Flip and write. You flip your cards, you're going to be writing in boxes. It's basically check off this box to get the reward of that box, so you can check off that box, rinse and repeat until the game is over. But it does so ridiculously well, and it's so rewarding to play, it's so rewarding to try new strategies, and the amount of stuff you don't get done, which usually bothers me in games, by the way. Usually in games, I want to get everything done, and so not getting things done, I want to get like 70% done. In Hadrian's Wall, you get like 40% done, 50% done maybe. And so it gives you a lot of stuff that you haven't explored, that you haven't tried, and that gives you another reason to dive into it. And I don't have a firm reason as to why in Hadrian's Wall it does not bother me when I don't get things done. To me, it's more about the exploration of diving into it again. It could be because of the simplicity of flip and write and roll and write games in general, that I appreciate that the depth here is almost achieved by the amount of stuff you don't get done, so you have to pick and choose, whereas in other games I'm like, I just want to get more done, and you're complex enough as it is, you don't need to have so much stuff that I didn't get to do. That's a supposed theory of my own as to why it doesn't bother me in Hadrian's Wall. But Hadrian's Wall is fantastic. It is the meatiest and thinkiest and most rewarding flip and write, roll and write game I have ever played. It's going to be most comparable to Fleet and Ganshun Clever. Fleet the dice game, to be clear. Fleet the dice game and Ganshun Clever will give you those escalating senses of I do this to get that, and I do this to get that, and these cascade nicely here, and boom, look at all the points I have. So if you like those experiences, I think you will love Hadrian's Wall, although understand it might be overwhelming. You might not find Hadrian's Wall as enjoyable, you might find it overwhelming. Factor that in. I would say Hadrian's Wall needs at least 2 plays. The first play is literally just a learning game. The first play is literally just, okay, what did I sign up for and how does anything work here? The second play is where you're like, ooh, now I understand the system and I want to do this again. My number 1, my favorite game from the reviews I've done, the past 30 reviews I've had, is Mind MGMT. Mind MGMT by Off the Page Games. This is the only 5 out of 5 out of all the games I covered in these, last 30 reviews. But Mind MGMT, I think I have Mind MGMT as a 5 out of 5. I think I had Ankh as a 4.5. I don't remember if I had any other 0.5s. I think the rest were 4s and lowers. But in any case, Mind MGMT is a hidden movement game from Off the Page Games that is aligned with Beast as far as my favorite hidden movement game that I've played ever. I haven't played Fear of Dracula. I know I need to do that, so I hopefully will do that at some point. But from the rest of them, I just think that Mind MGMT is accessible, it is elegant, it solves a lot of the problems I have with hidden movement games in general, and so does Beast for that matter. Both of them had a way of solving the problem I have with hidden movement games, in the sense that I find within the genre of hidden movement games, you can have amazing games, and you can have games that feel a bit like a dud, feel a bit like a chase that you never really get anywhere, and nothing really happens properly. And so to that end, like I talked about with games like Moonrakers, as well as, what else did I talk about? Cosmic Encounter. For me, I don't want games that give me inconsistently good plays. I want games that give me consistently good plays, because if I'm going to sign up my game night, my single game that night with my group, to a game, I want to have a good time. And so it's one thing to try something new and say it's not for you and then you move on from it. It's another to keep something knowing that each time is a risk of whether it'll be a good play or a mediocre play. And so in that case, a lot of these hidden movement games I find fall into that trap. They're really fun most of the time, or sometimes, and other times they're a bit of a dud. Mind MGMT and Beast both have very different ways of solving that problem, but Mind MGMT, I find that, first of all, the gameplay comes in around half an hour, generally. It could be a little longer, but generally 30 to 40 minutes, which is really solid for the amount of game and thinkiness it gives you. But then also, I find that it has a sense of, as the recruiter, as the person trying to stay hidden, you basically feel ahead for the first half of the game. And then as the hunters, the agents, you feel ahead for the second half of the game. Both players get to experience a sense of being free, of being able to just, well, in the case of the agents, the pursuers, you feel completely lost the first half, and then you feel like the net is closing around the second half. And then that moment of capture is so rewarding, and I find the moment of capture happens a lot. I find you have to be a very good recruiter, or have enough shift packages opening up to be able to stay away from those agents. It is such a rewarding experience, really, really solid. Again, if you like hidden movement games, I think this is one of the best ones out there, and you should give it a shot. If you don't like hidden movement games, this might change your mind. I don't know enough. I haven't actually played this with anyone who hasn't played a hidden movement game, so I can't comment on whether this will change minds or not. But with that said, these are the 30 games I've reviewed in the past 6 weeks, and my general ranking within those 30 games. A lot of good games here. A bunch of them that I'm keeping, a bunch that I'm getting rid of. It's just the way of the game, the cycle of things that I play and all of that. But some here I think will be here for a long time. Mind MGMT, Hadrian's Wall, City of Spies, Radlands, Ankh, I think Resurgence. I think those top 6. Bonfire, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a bunch under the top 6 that I really like. But those top 6, I imagine they'll be in my collection for quite some time. We'll see how things take us. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and have a good one.